Dame i gospodo,
Ladies and gentlemen, dear listeners, viewers, fellow colleagues, and everybody else who is going to follow along today, this very interesting conference, welcome to another press club that has traditionally been organized by the Representation Office of the European Commission to the Republic of Croatia. Today we have an exceptional conference due to the restrictions in place for COVID-19. We have only a few people here in the conference hall, but we will have persons joining us online. We will have a representative from DG Sante, from the European Medicines Agency, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. We will also have the director of the Croatian Public Health Institute.
htjela pozvati
But before that, I'd like to invite everybody to be active today, to ask questions through Sli.do application. And I believe everybody is well familiar with this. We will have three polls. The first one we will roll out even now, and during the panel discussion, we will have two additional polls so that we can feel the way that you are thinking. And at the end of the first part or the first panel, we will ask our participants the questions that you send in via Sli.do. We would be very glad to have such questions. And now, for the very start, we would like to welcome the panelists today, because today's panel will be in two parts. First of all, we will talk about the European vaccines strategy, and the second part will focus on the acceleration of vaccination in the EU. These are both very topical issues, and in Croatia we see an increase in the numbers of persons contracted coronavirus. We have more than 2,600. Now we have Mr. Capak, who has now joined us straight from the press conference of the Civil Protection Headquarters. Hello and welcome. We now have to welcome the director of the DG Sante, Mr. John Ryan. Hello and welcome to Press Club. Mr. Capak, you are now mic'd up. Hello and welcome. Hello, everybody. We will have Noel Wassion, who is the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the European Medicines Agency, and we will have the head of the task force for the fight of COVID-19 of the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. Can you hear us?
dok
Okay, while we establish a connection, okay, here we go. Hello and welcome.
i odmah
And we will start with the first question, if we manage. The European vaccines strategy over the last few months has seen great criticism, especially in the last month. Where have we gone wrong? Have we gone wrong? Could the EU have had more vaccines quicker?
čini mi se da ipak imam
Okay, it seems that we have some communication issues, that our participants online cannot hear us. We have some trouble. And until our technicians deal with this, let's move on to Mr. Capak. In Croatia today, we see a very, very high number in comparison to the previous days. To be in a topic with today's conference, the deviation from the European Commission's plans in terms of stronger vaccine rollout, we see that the third wave has arrived. Well, we had we received the envisaged amounts of the vaccines, we would be in a much better situation because we would have vaccinated more people who would then join with the persons who have already had the disease, and we'll have a larger number of persons immune to the disease. But what has happened has happened. And the question that you asked Mr. Ryan, I can also comment. Of course, there have been mistakes because there have been no
o tome jer smo naravno
there have been no penalties for the undelivered vaccines. It's very difficult to say from today's position, could we have done better? But we tried to use the first offered vaccine from the EU, and we asked even more than we wanted to have in the first tranche. So it was 2.7 million doses that we asked for. And as per the promise made by AstraZeneca, in the first quarter, we should have received 1.72 million doses, and we only got 175,000 doses, which is only 10% of what we were promised. This is very bad. We have also purchased CureVac and Johnson & Johnson's and Pfizer's vaccines, but these are going to be delivered at a later stage. We thought that Pfizer would also deliver the vaccines later on, but it was also registered, and we are starting to receive the doses, and in April we are expecting to have more than 200,000 doses. We are also hoping for the acceleration of the vaccine that the EU is currently negotiating about. So 10 million doses from Q4 of 2021 has been transferred to Q2, and now the member states are arranging how they're going to divide these vaccines. We hope for solidarity so that the countries that have ordered more Pfizer vaccines would actually give the vaccines from AstraZeneca to the member states that have ordered more. So we have seen some promises, and there is a meeting today of Coreper that we hope we'll see a decision being made so that we can make up from this deficit of AstraZeneca vaccine that we see today, and that we will come to an equal ground with the other member states, because we are planning to vaccinate 50% of our population. Will we deviate from this plan? Well, if we receive this acceleration doses, we will be close to the 50% mark on June 1st. So we have done some calculations, and if we distribute the vaccines in a just and solid, in a manner which shows solidarity, so that those who have ordered more Pfizer vaccine give the vaccines to those who have ordered AstraZeneca vaccines, it would be great to have an ideal situation, but for those member states that actually ordered more, AstraZeneca should be in a way compensated, so that we can take from Q4 to transfer it to Q2, so that we have the vaccination status across Europe to be fairly equal. If we don't do this, we have a lot of economic, family, social, sporting connections. People travel, and if we do not offer somewhat equal vaccination, we've done nothing. Now let's see, Mr. Ryan. The European vaccines strategy, especially in the last month, has received a lot of criticism. Mr. Ryan, where did we go wrong?
being treated by the vaccines that have been authorized. So there's a whole process going on at the moment to increase the level of testing and sequencing to find these variants and to help the pharmaceutical industry to develop re-engineered vaccines to deal with these new variants of COVID.
Hvala vam
In
lijepa.
addition to this, of course, you also have some questions regarding one of the vaccines which has been authorized and where I'm sure my colleague from the agency, the medicines agency can speak later on. So my message is that the European Union has worked together for the very first time to purchase a large number of vaccines for the population. These are being delivered at different speeds in the member states at the moment. And in the meantime, until the population is vaccinated according to our targets, of course, a number of measures have to be taken to reduce the transmission within the community. And this is also something where we're trying to coordinate the position of the member states so that you have comparable measures being taken between the member states to reduce the spread of the infection. And I can, of course, go into more detail on that later on. Thank you.
Hvala.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Vassion, the EMA is deciding today on AstraZeneca, which, as we've heard from Mr. Capak, your colleague. But my primary question is, why is EMA slower, taking longer to approve these vaccinations than your colleagues in the UK or in the USA?
Thank you for that question and good afternoon. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to provide some information to the Croatian public in relation to the authorization and supervision and maintenance by the EMA of treatments, either vaccines or therapeutics, which have been authorized by the European Union. In order to reply to your question, one has to take into account that as of the beginning, the European Union has opted for the most robust process in order to approve vaccines and to roll out these vaccines in mass national vaccination campaigns. And that was using what we call in a very technical language, a conditional marketing authorization, which means that at the end of the day, the European Commission, on the basis of the scientific review by the EMA, with involvement of experts from all the national competent authorities, will provide its view on the pharmaceutical quality and the safety and efficacy of the vaccine before that it is rolled out. So that is an important nuance to make. It will also allow you, on top of the robustness of the review, that there are very strict conditions attached to the marketing authorization, which means that the companies are required to fulfill those conditions in the time frame specified, and there will be an annual review of those conditions or earlier if there is a need in order to do so. The main difference then with primarily the US and the UK is that they are using what one can describe as emergency use authorizations, which is a kind of a temporary permit in order to distribute or to supply a non-authorized vaccine into the population. So we are still talking in those situations about the non-authorized vaccine, but where a temporary supply is being used, and then this is then rolled out through a national vaccination program. Over.
Gospodine.
Mr. Egdahl, we will now hear from the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. So, Mr. Egdahl, what is the COVID-19 situation currently in the European Union? We heard from Mr. Capak. He had bad news on the situation in Croatia, so we would like to hear about the situation in other countries.
Thank you very much. And also echoing the thank you for invitation to this important meeting. So unfortunately, as you've said before, the epidemiological situation does not look good. And it really gives rise to much concern. We saw after the Christmas that for a few months that the situation increasingly got better, but in the last 3 to 4 weeks, it has really changed for the worse. And if we are looking at the most recent figures, in the last week, there was around 1.7 million cases, new cases reported in the to ECDC from the EUEA countries. And this is in 1 week only, it's up 14%. We also saw 25,000 new deaths. The increase there is slower, but we know that it starts with disease and then death comes some weeks later. So we could probably also see a similar increase in the number of deaths, even though now the elderly, most vulnerable population has been immunized. So if we are looking in total, since this pandemic started, there has been 26 million notified COVID cases in Europe and over 600,000 deaths. So it has really taken a huge toll. And if we are looking now, of course, the map over Europe that we are publishing on the ECDC website every week, it changes the colors. Some weeks we see more problem in some countries, and then it moves to others. In the last week, we have seen the highest notification rates from Czechia, Hungary, Estonia, and Sweden, the lowest in Iceland, Norway, and Finland. But I guess you are most interested in the situation in Croatia. Unfortunately, I didn't get all the information in the beginning, but if we are looking at the last week, we had 6,615 cases reported from Croatia in week 12. And in the previous week, it was 4,566. This is a 45% increase. And this is the second highest increase in notification in Europe. It's only Iceland that had more, with very, very few cases. So indeed, it's a very troublesome situation in Europe, and it's a very troublesome situation in Croatia. And then, as John Ryan was mentioning, this is largely due now to the introduction of variants. So the variant that we call B117, in media I think is mostly called the UK variant, is now the dominant variant in the EUEA countries. And we see it in community transmission, and we see it in outbreaks. But we also see increases in the South African variant, and more troublesome, even more troublesome, also with the Brazilian P1 variant, which we know that the vaccines are less effective for. So it is indeed a very troublesome situation. And the main message here, and especially to all those that believe that now with vaccination that we can start interacting as we did before losing the measures, that this is definitely not the case now. I'm handing over back to the moderator.
Gospodine Ryan, vraćamo se.
Mr. Ryan, coming back to you with the next question. We have heard about the situation overall. Heard about the situation in terms of vaccine authorization, but we are mostly focused with your negotiations with the pharmaceutical companies, because they have not really stuck to the agreed amounts. Do you think that something can be done so that the EU population can get vaccinated by the summer?
Let me say that as regards the implementation of the contracts which have been signed with the 6 companies and with the 4 for the 4 vaccines which have been authorized, the Commission is following individually and on a daily basis with the manufacturing companies the manufacturing of these vaccines and the delivery of these vaccines. And I would say that there are 3 types of problem which we have identified so far. First of all, there are questions about individual vaccines and concerns about whether they should be used in particular population groups, and eventually the identification of side effects. So you know that the European Medicines Agency has been recently giving advice on one of these vaccines and on its safety profile. And this is a continuing discussion as new data becomes available. But the products are authorized, and therefore there's a mechanism for checking and for following up on any reports of any side effects. The point I would make is the same point as Chancellor Merkel made in a press conference last night, when she said that it is normal when you're vaccinating a large number of people that you do have these side effects. And I would say, you asked me at the very beginning, what's the bad news? I'd like to say, what's the good news? The good news is that these vaccines are being rolled out and that we have a system in place which is identifying any side effects. So it's not like we're driving in the dark here. We have a system in place which is working, and we shouldn't criticize ourselves for that. The second type of problem, which we've seen with the delivery of the vaccines so far, has been the issue of manufacturing questions. And you understand that making a vaccine is a complicated thing. It's not a question of simply putting some ingredients together, putting those ingredients in a bottle, and then you have your vaccine. It's a very, very high technology and highly safety conscious product. It has to be produced to the highest standards. And there have been some experiences with the manufacture of certain of the vaccines which have delayed the production of the final product because of the production difficulties that have been encountered at different stages. So, for example, in Belgium, wish to increase the size of its production capacity by increasing the size of the factory. And in order to do so, it had to stop delivery for a week or two. And this, of course, messed up and disturbed the vaccination timetable in some member states. So you can see that even when companies are trying to increase their capacity, sometimes this results in temporary delays in delivery. And the third aspect which I would mention, which has been problematic, is the issue of the balance between domestic production in Europe. Europe is a major manufacturing area for vaccines, for all types of vaccines. And of course, our capacity to manufacture and deliver vaccines to our own population, and then our responsibility for contracts which might have been signed with countries outside Europe. And this has become a political discussion in the last few weeks, and the Commission has first introduced a system for prior notification of exports outside the European Union of vaccines manufactured in the EU. It's a very complicated question because sometimes the exports are matched with imports from the same country. So you can have a situation where the European Union would be exporting to a country outside Europe and at the same time would be importing something else from that country. Similarly, you have a situation where the European Union could be exporting the final product outside Europe, but at the same time importing some of the components from the third country outside Europe. So it's a very difficult balance to achieve, but the European Commission wanted to mobilize mechanisms so that we would know what's going on and that the targets for delivering the vaccination to the European population would be our priority. And this is something which is, as you'll understand, going on at the moment. Thank you.
Gospodine Capak, evo da se nadovežem.
Mr. Capak, to comment further on this, Croatia has also seen discussions about this. Can we become the manufacturers of the vaccines from Jadran Galenski laboratory? And we have heard before that if they could receive a license, they would be prepared to do so and ready to do so. What are the chances for such things? Well, as you know, we used to have an Institute of Immunology that in the second part of the 20th century was one of the large players in terms of production and export of bacterial and viral vaccines. And due to different reasons and the globalization of production and some issues with privatizations has now definitely seen better days, and it has not clearly been functioning for a while, but we have plans to revitalize the institute. And the current government and the Ministry of Health actually specify this Institute of Immunology to be revitalized in the coming years. It's not a simple process, but we have to say that this institute, even though a lot of people have left, still has some employees who have knowledge, and we do have some of the variants that are very valuable, that could be used for the production of viral vaccines that would be very welcome. Such vaccines are in shortage globally, and if we revitalize our Institute of Immunology, it could once again become a big player. And then we will have just one step to producing under a license, to producing vaccines. And as far as I know, the discussion about the revitalization of the Institute have now been going on for a long time. There is also land that has been designated near Brezje, and there are plans in place to construct the new facility. And the old building was damaged in the earthquake, and our facility was also damaged in the earthquake as well. But we do have land in place, and it would be great for building such a facility, and I believe we will move in this direction. And as far as Jadran Galenski laboratory is concerned, I know that in the medical products and the vitamins and additives, they are in a good place. But in terms of producing vaccines, I don't know. Well, the production of vaccine is in general quite more complex than producing medicinal products and vitamins and supplements. I cannot speak to vaccines. Well, once again, for our audience that is following along via Sli.do app, this will be a moment when we have the second poll of the three that we are plan to do today, and you can ask questions, of course, as we go along. And after 3 p.m., we will try to answer the questions. And now, let's move to Mr. Noel Vassion in the European Medicines Agency. What you have told us up until now, actually, the question again goes to you. What is the safety of AstraZeneca vaccine? The EMA has confirmed that the vaccine is safe. Do you still hold this position, especially in terms of women under the age of 65?
Thank you for that question. We should not forget that we are dealing with one of the biggest public health crises in history, and on top of that, we are confronted with a very important socio-economic crisis. And vaccines are an important pillar, an important tool in order to get us out of this crisis. The ultimate goal is, of course, that we have to avoid at all costs that people are getting ill or getting critically ill, end up in hospitals, or even worse, in intensive care units, and even may die. I mean, that should be our primary objective, to avoid that. And that's where vaccines play a very important role in order to achieve this aim. As I've tried to explain in the first question, is that we have a robust system in place in order to look at the pharmaceutical quality, the safety and efficacy. We should not forget that the clinical trials that have been conducted have involved the largest number of participants, up to 30 or 40,000, much more than what we normally require for instance, flu vaccines. And yet, despite all that, it is possible that when you roll out a vaccine to millions, tens of millions of people, you may see occasionally rare side effects. That can never be excluded. So that is what we are now confronted with. So how do we deal with that? Well, we have systems in place in order to monitor. It's very important in this respect that what we call spontaneous reporting, which means reporting by individuals, by healthcare professionals, pharmacists, medical doctors, in case vaccinated people are confronted with particular side effects, that these are being made known to the Croatian agency, to the European Medicines Agency. They are put in our database, which is the largest database of adverse drug reactions in the world, and that we can start looking at these data. And the more information we have, the better it is in order to come as quickly as possible to inform decision-making. Now, what we have seen for AstraZeneca were indeed very rare thromboembolic events that needed further investigation. Blood clots combined with low levels of blood platelets. So our pharmacovigilance risk assessment committee, which is one of our main scientific committees at the EMA, has immediately started looking at this, concluded on the 18th of March that the benefits of vaccinating and avoiding people to get critically ill, ending up in hospital, and perhaps even dying, that those benefits far outweigh the risks of having these very rare side effects. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at these side effects, that we should understand, are these side effects linked to the vaccination or not? Because it's not because you have a side effect after vaccination that necessarily it means that it is caused by the vaccination. Therefore, to have as much information as possible about the event reported by the healthcare professional, well substantiated, is of utmost importance for regulatory authorities such as the Croatian agency, Medicines Agency, and the EMA in order to come to conclusions. Now, we have, of course, once we provided that message that the benefit risk is still positive, but that there are these rare thromboembolic events, we have given information to healthcare professionals what are the symptoms that they need to have a look at and then immediately take action. Now, we have followed up on Monday and today. On Monday, we convened an ad hoc expert group with expertise from different parts of the, still epidemiologists, hematologists, etc., have been looking at the data, trying to understand, is there a relationship or not? If so, what is the mechanism which caused this particular side effects, trying to come to that understanding. Now, that meeting has taken place on Monday. The discussions are currently or the outcome of these discussions are discussed at this moment by our Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, which will look into what do we need in order to still bridge the knowledge gap that we currently have in place. There will be further studies that are needed, non-clinical and clinical studies. We will be asking the pharmaceutical company, but we will also do it ourselves, sometimes even in collaboration with our colleagues from Stockholm, in order to acquire additional information. Those discussions will continue next week, and hopefully we should then be in a better position to have additional information gathered from the ad hoc expert group. Now, for the time being, still, I mean, we do not see that there is any need in order to change the conclusion that we have put forward 2 weeks ago. So the benefits outweigh the risks. We do not see at this particular moment in time any risk factors that we should take care of. So all that, as I mentioned before, will now be further debated over the next days to come. We will still acquire additional information and then take a decision on the basis of the documentation we will have at that moment in time. But it is important to continue emphasizing that, and we are only guided by scientific evidence. It's very important for the robustness of the scientific review that on the basis of the data that we have, benefits outweigh the risks for vaccination, and therefore we continue maintaining that particular viewpoint whilst trying to get additional information either through the spontaneous reporting or by involving additional experts. It is a very rare event, and we need to come to a grip if there is a causal relationship or not. It cannot be excluded at this moment in time, but it is not proven at this moment in time. Over.
Gospodin Ryan iz Glavne uprave za zdravlje.
Mr. Ryan, you wanted to add something, so Mr. Ryan, please.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to intervene following our Croatian colleague and what he was talking about opening new manufacturing capacity for vaccines in Croatia. Just to say that I think we have a short-term issue on production of vaccines and a longer-term issue. For the short term, the Commission has set up a task force for industrial scale-up under the responsibility of Commissioner Breton. And the aim is to ramp up or to increase our production capacity for vaccines, acting as a one-stop shop for manufacturers in need of support. The idea is to really bring together different actors and different players in the pharmaceutical sector in order to focus on the industrial scale-up of COVID vaccine production in Europe and to eliminate bottlenecks where they may occur. And I just want to say that the bottlenecks don't always happen where you think they might happen. They can also happen with the production of ancillary or supporting equipment and materials. For example, the production of sterile liners in the tanks where vaccines are produced. These have shown to be in short supply. And of course, this has a direct impact on the manufacturing capacity for vaccines, but also some of the products like nanoparticles, vaccine bottles, and syringes are also in supply tension. And this is why the Commission is trying to ramp up and support industry to work together to increase in the shorter term our capacity to produce the vaccines. The second point is a more long-term problem on the availability of these countermeasures, these medical countermeasures to deal with health threats. And here the Commission is proposing the creation of a system where we identify the threats that could affect Europe or indeed could affect other parts of the world and then affect Europe afterwards. Secondly, to look on the basis of these threats, to look and see what products could be produced and developed to deal with those threats. We're talking here not only about vaccines, but about other therapies. And thirdly, to actually organize and pay for the production of these products and stockpile them in advance of the event happening. You heard from my first intervention that we have been spending the last months buying gloves, buying masks, buying ventilators, buying therapeutics, buying vaccines. what we are proposing for the future, for the longer term, is that there would be a system where all of this work and development and production would be done in advance to prepare for these outbreaks as far as possible. It was not the case with COVID because COVID was a new infection, but at the same time, a lot of the work which was done before was mobilized and operationalized to produce these vaccines on time. We're hoping to go earlier in the process by creating this capacity for Europe to manufacture and stockpile products in advance of a new outbreak. Thank you.
Hvala vam, gospodine Rajan.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. I would like to take this opportunity because we will be signing out of the first radio channel and the fourth television channel. We will no longer be live with them. We invite all of our viewers and listeners to stay with us on online platforms where they can put questions and participate in our polls on our Sli.do platform. Moving on, my next question is for Mr. Ekdahl. I would like to hear the risks that the European Union is facing now when it comes to different variants of this virus, SARS-CoV-2. How much of a threat is it, considering that the vaccines that we have been developed for the previously known variants? So how much of a threat is this for the health in the European Union?
Sorry, I don't know. The question was raised. We lost the sound for a bit. So, to whom is the question raised?
To Mr. Karl Ekdahl.
Okay.
Okay, is it about the variants?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I mean, John Ryan and myself, we mentioned the variants before. And this is really the additional problem now, because the one thing that is common for all these variants of concern is that they are more transmissible from one person to another. And this is happening right now, and it's happening in all the country. And this means that more people will be infected, more people will be hospitalized, and in the end, more people will die from it. But the good side is that the measures that are already in place to reduce opportunities for transmission are the same for the old virus and the new viruses, the new variants, but they need to be complied to more rigorously in order to be equally affected against the new variant viruses. We do have some experience in Europe. We have experience from the United Kingdom. We have experience from Denmark that shows that it's possible to mitigate the impact of more transmissible viruses. But this needs really a combined approach, which includes stronger measures, and that these measures are really adapted according to the local and the national situation at any time. It requires intense sequencing so that we are really knowing what is happening and especially to identify if there are new variants of concerns coming up. But we also need more comprehensive case identification and contact tracing. This works fine in many countries, but I think a lot is needed to be done in Europe overall. And then, of course, as was discussed before, we need efficient vaccination of the vulnerable. But we do have more of a communication problem here. Because the population, they have been, for a year, they have been used to the measures for the more non-transmissible variants. But now when we have bugs out there that transmit more easily from one person to another, this needs to get into the mindset of people. And they are not used to it. And this means that there is a need for an intense and efficient communication. And this is not only the top-down normal communication, speaking in radio, etc. So we really need to bring into the table that was previously occupied by epidemiologists and microbiologists. We need to bring in people with knowledge in behavior change, knowledge in risk communication, that can guide public health in framing communication in a way that it really leads from just being informed to actually changing behaviors. And this is new competencies that we normally did not have too much of when it came to communicable disease control, but it's much needed. We have seen it in previous epidemics, we have seen it in previous pandemics, and we see it now that in order to really have efficient, we need to get out to the people, to the heart of the people, and change behaviors and not only understanding. Thank you.
Hvala I vama. Sad ćemo pomalo početi uključivati.
Thank you. Now we will start adding questions that we received through Sli.do. The first question came from Mirko. Will there be any penalties for AstraZeneca for breach of contract at the level of the European Union? I think this is a question for Mr. Ryan.
Yes, can you repeat the question? I'm afraid the translation didn't come very clearly.
Evo, ja samo molim da...
Okay, we will repeat the question. So will there be any penalties for AstraZeneca because of the breach of contract at the level of the European Union?
There are discussions going on at very high levels. Also this week, between the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the Chief Officer of AstraZeneca in order to examine the conditions for respect of the contract. So there are discussions going on in respect of the capacity to respect the current contract and also the possibilities for increasing supply in the short term. We're not at the stage at the moment of discussing internally in the Commission any breach of contract with a particular company, but we're more looking for solutions in respect of how the supply can be increased in the short term. And I mentioned some examples of that earlier on. I mentioned the fact that we're working in a task force to increase the level of supply by bringing together different elements of the pharmaceutical industry to work together to increase the level of supply. But secondly, I mentioned as well the export authorization procedures which have been introduced and which of course are more relevant for certain companies than for others. So I would not like to say that we're going down this road of penalty clauses and legal disputes between the Commission and the manufacturers. We're looking more to see how the difficulties which the manufacturers are having in respecting the contracts can be sorted out, either through increased cooperation between actors in the pharmaceutical sector, but also looking at the issue of how exports should be managed. Thank you.
Hvala vama, a evo već imamo i
Thank you. We have the next question through Sli.do. What about Sputnik 5? Are there any news regarding the authorization of this vaccine? And if so, will the Russians be able to supply the required amounts? Mr. Vastion, I think this question would be for you.
Aj vas, gospodine Capak, zanima.
So if I understood, the question is about Sputnik, just the Sputnik vaccine and where we are at this moment in time. So for the Sputnik vaccine, it's one of the three vaccines that are currently under what we call a rolling review. A rolling review means that data are being submitted in packages, can be a mixture of pharmaceutical quality, non-clinical, clinical, are being evaluated by our experts, and then we go back with any allowing the company to come back again to us so we can speed up the overall process. This rolling review concept we have used for all the vaccines. So we started with that for the first vaccine, Pfizer, BioNTech, and Novavax, CureVac, and Sputnik are currently under this rolling review. Once we are confident that the data that are being provided are sufficient for going to the next step, which is the conditional marketing authorization process, then we will start that particular process. For none of those three vaccines, so Novavax, CureVac, or Sputnik, we are at that stage. So we are still at this moment of at the stage of the rolling review. To give a time frame about when we will be able in order to come to a conclusion is a little bit too early at this moment in time, because an additional aspect that we need to do is to inspect the manufacturing sites in Russia, since those sites do not have at this moment what we call a good manufacturing practice certificate. So that is valid for all the manufacturing sites on which the European Union relies in order to, let's say, to produce a medicinal product or a vaccine. So those sites first need to be inspected. We are working together with the European Commission delegation in Moscow, inspectors from the member states, in order to perform that inspection in the next weeks to come. That inspection will then be incorporated in the scientific review process, and then hopefully we can move as quickly as possible. We will know, I think, more, in terms of a definitive timing, I would say towards the end of April, perhaps the beginning of May, and then we can give a more appropriate timing in terms of where we may end up in terms of concluding our scientific review for the Sputnik vaccine. Over.
Gospodine Capak, evo moram vas pitati jer je Sputnik P...
Mr. Capak, I have to ask, because Sputnik 5 was a big issue here in Croatia. Are you happy with the dynamics that the EMA is going to be working on this? And is Croatia still firm in its standing that it will wait for the authorization? Yes, well, it's always possible if the Croatian government assesses that it would be of more benefit to try emergency import than to further negotiate with the EU in terms of the acceleration doses and wait for the vaccines. But I have to say, I think that regardless of the fact that this process is somewhat slower, and as my colleague from EMA has said, it's a more complicated and longer process than the FDA and the British regulatory agency have implemented, but it is the price of the quality of vaccine. And as my colleague has also said, other than reviewing the documentation regarding the manufacture of vaccines and the laboratory tests on animals and clinical trials and the visits to the facility, then the implementation of good production practice is maintained. Then it provides a final decision where all and every tranches of the vaccine is tested at a facility in Germany, which means that all and every milliliters of the delivered vaccines is of the same quality. And therefore, the safety, quality, and health of those using the vaccines is immeasurable. And I welcome the process of the EMA rather than emergency import, but it's always an option. Mr. Egdal, the next question is for you. until we come to an end of this situation where the distribution of vaccines is still low, how can the member states adopt and adjust their health measures? We see examples from Croatia today where we see a large increase in the number of persons with coronavirus, and we see the reactions from other countries. Your positions as ECDC, what are the best health measures?
As I said before, the health measures are not different now from the ones that we have been using before. But I think what is more delicate and more tricky now is the balance and exactly how to use them. Because we do have several factors that are working in different directions. We do have the vaccinations now, and we know that while we are rolling out the vaccination, that will also increase the transmission. We have an influx of variants, and depending on how much variants we have and how much they are increasing the transmissibility, that's driving in one direction. And then we have all the measures, and each measure will have an impact. If schools are closed or open, that will have an impact. If people are wearing face masks or not wearing face masks, that will have an impact. If we are decreasing the mobility, if we are working from home, etc., etc. So there's a wide range of different measures, and all of them have an impact on the daily life of people. And of course, now everyone is tired. There is a COVID fatigue. We are moving towards the tourist season in a country like Croatia, where people from all over Europe want to spend their vacation. So we need really to fine-tune week by week what is the best possible balance between measures, taking into account the vaccination rate and the trends of the transmission. So what ECDC has been doing, now we have been doing an extensive modeling work together with modeling experts across Europe to really find instruments how to fine-tune this so that each country, depending on the specificities in that country, could fine-tune and take the absolute best measure in order to open up the society as much as is possible without risking going into a situation where transmission takes off, infection takes off, hospitalization takes off, death takes off. And for this, you really need to put all these different factors into the model. So this is now published on the ECDC website. We are working together with the countries. And we are presenting in the Health Security Committee to provide this instrument to the countries to really now fine-tune the measures. And in the end, this is a balance. It's a political decision, but it needs to be based as much as possible on the available science. What will happen if you start to tweak on that direction or in that direction? So there's not one answer fit all, but it's up to each country to do whatever measures are most fit in that situation and at that time. Thank you.
Hvala I vama.
Thank you. Mr. Ekdal has mentioned the tourist season, which is, of course, very important for Croatia. Mr. Ryan, there is a lot of discussion ahead of the tourist season because as a Southern European country, we see questions of COVID-19 passports. Is it a question of discrimination in a situation where we don't have enough vaccine?
Of the Commission was to make a proposal, even though the epidemiological situation of the spread of the virus is still an ongoing situation. So the Commission did not want to wait until everything was finished in terms of transmission before making this proposal. And that's why we have made a legal proposal for what we call a digital green certificate. The idea is to facilitate safe, free movement during the pandemic within the European Union. It should not, however, be a precondition for travel. It's intended as being proof that a person has been vaccinated or has received a negative test result or has recovered from a recent infection with COVID, which could convey a certain immunity. And we now hope that the European Council and the European Parliament will advance with their examination of this file swiftly so that the legal framework can be put in place to support this type of certification. The Commission, on our side, will create a gateway to ensure that all of the certificates which are contained and exchanged can be guaranteed and verified. And we will support the Member States in the implementation of these certificates. We also hope that these certificates could be also available in paper form if people prefer to have them in paper form. And let me say that several Member States have already launched national approaches. I'm thinking here in particular of Austria, Greece and Cyprus. And clearly, it's not a good idea in the European Union, where we have free movement, that there should be 27 different systems. That's why for the contact tracing file, which we mentioned earlier on and which Carl Ekdahl mentioned earlier on, we have created a gateway as well for contact tracing apps to be in contact with each other. And the proposal for these certificates of vaccination or test result certificates is something similar. It's really a way for people to use these when they're traveling within the European Union. And of course, we're also discussing with the World Health Organization and with other international organizations how these certificates can be recognized. So this is ongoing work, I would say. The Commission has made this proposal in order to be ready for a situation when travel becomes more feasible. And as I said, it should not be a precondition for travel, but a support to travel, to avoid you having to deal with, for example, isolation and quarantine on arrival in a country. If you can prove that you have already been vaccinated, if you can prove that you have had a negative test result, if you can prove that you have had a recent infection which will give you a certain level of immunity, then this can also, of course, help with internal transport in the European Union. Thank you.
Gospodine Vasion, još i za vas jedno pitanje.
Mr. Vasion, another question for you. Everybody is concerned about the new variants. Does the EU have an answer to this? How fast can the vaccines be adapted to the new variants, and what is the role of HERA?
John Ryan already referred to the fact that the variants are an important new kid on the block, if I can call it like that, an important element that we have to take into account while we are still coming to a grip with the current pandemic, where, of course, in a number of member states, some of the variants are already becoming very, very dominant. Certainly, the UK are one of the UK ones. Now, what we have been doing is preparing for how to deal with any changes in the composition and the vaccines that may be needed. So first of all, we have asked the companies for the approved vaccines to look into any data that they have, which could demonstrate that they're also effective against the new variants. And then I mean primarily the UK variant, the South African variant, and the Brazilian variant. But tomorrow we may have another variant, and the day thereafter we may have another one. So, and I see my colleague from ECDC saying, yeah, so we have to be prepared to a kind of an ongoing exercise. And we have to make sure that what we put in place is flexible and agile enough to address an ever-changing situation. Now, this being said, we have taken a number of actions. First of all, as I said, we have asked the companies to look into the effectiveness of the vaccines that are currently rolled out against these variants. Secondly, we have put scientific guidance in terms of what do we need as scientific data for any change that we have to introduce in the currently approved vaccines. The Commission is putting in place a system in order to have a rapid approval of the current marketing authorizations. We are in dialogue, of course, with international partners and primarily the FDA in the United States, so that we all remain aligned. One problem, of course, will be the timing of switching. So depending how the situation, how the pandemic evolves, which variant will be dominant in a particular country, a difficult exercise which will have to take place is you have the current vaccines, of the current composition, you may have a new composition. So when do you switch? Do you have to still need the two in place at the same moment in time? That will also lead into questions about the capacity the manufacturing again. So it becomes a little bit more challenging to handle, I would say. And over the next few weeks to come, we will have to sort out all these additional points so that we are prepared whenever companies will have to produce the vaccines to take care of the new variants so that they can be rolled out as quickly as possible. Over.
Prije nego krenemo na...
Well, before we move on to the closing remarks to close today's press club, Mr. Capak, to keep it short, what's the situation with the new variants here in Croatia? Do we have enough sequencing so that we know what variants we currently have? Do we have predominantly the British variant? What does this mean for the tourist season? Where the first thing is that we are intensively working for to improve our capacities for sequencing, and we use the PCR to identify the to confirm suspicion of new variants, and we have had some 2,200 samples that we sent to ECDC for sequencing, and at the start we had 25% of the British variant, and in the last tranche of 356 samples taken on the 9th and the 16th of March, we currently see an 82% of the British variant, so it absolutely dominates. Up until now, we did not have larger numbers of the South African variants. We've only had 15 identified. All of these people have been placed into quarantine and have been processed epidemiologically. We are seeing the presence of new variants causing disease and illness in younger people, but of course we have to adapt, and as my colleague have said, we have to find new ways to deal with this, because the classical epidemiological measures are still in place, but in terms of vaccinating and other measures, we have to adapt. And in the future, we will have newer measures as well. And to end with, I'd like to invite everybody to answer the question whether they are optimistic. Are you optimistic that by the summer and during the summer we will return somewhat to a normal life? Well, before we finish, I would like to thank our colleagues abroad for the information that have shared with us. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm optimistic. With the powerful weapon of vaccines at our disposals, as well as the measures and restrictions and the new simplified measures of testing, we will be successful in fighting COVID-19. And a little than a year ago, when asked when all of this is going to come to an end, I said that before the next summer, so this summer, we will have an easier time because we will have higher rates of immunity. Maybe we will have a cure or a vaccine, but now we have a vaccine, and I only wish for as many people to become vaccinated as quick as possible. Mr. Eckhart, are you optimistic?
I think one should always be realistic rather than optimistic or pessimistic. I think we have a good chance. I mean, the vaccines has been, an immense breakthrough. It's normally this takes 5-10 years or more to get the vaccine on the market. This was done in 1 year. I think this is an amazing feat. At the same time, we are fighting a virus that is all constantly mutating. So it will really be science, public health, policy, vaccines that needs to be really on top. And I think the most important thing is that we are not letting the guard down. That we will try always to make the best measures, always use the best science, always use the best policy. And that, I think, will be the guarantee that we can come out of this as best as could possibly be done. Thank you.
Mr. Ryan, what do you think about the coming summer? Will you go on vacation to the seaside, maybe to Croatia?
I'm an optimist by nature. I think you cannot do this job in the Commission unless you are optimistic. So really, I hope 3 times that Europe will escape from this huge pandemic as soon as possible, even if possible in the lead up to the summer. I think all of the ingredients are there in order to help the European population to get out of this situation. We have an increasing supply of vaccines. We will have also a reinforced supply of therapeutics, in other words, other pharmaceutical products which can be used to reduce the severity. I would like to give a message now to our healthcare workforce who have been really in the front line for over a year. And really, I think they have done a wonderful job across Europe. And I think we should use this occasion to thank them for everything that they've done and that they are continuing to do. And that's why I want to give a positive message from this conference, not looking at what went wrong, looking at what went right. And hopefully in the coming months, we can get out of this situation and get back to normal life. And of course, if I can spend some time on the Croatian beaches, I would happily do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vasion. Do you have similar plans?
Well, I think, first of all, I've already visited Croatia a number of times, and they have a very beautiful country. We have to be optimistic, of course. We have achieved a lot, as the colleague from ECDC mentioned, in a little bit more than 1 year. Who would have thought that we would be rolling out mass national vaccination campaigns? There is still work to be done on the side of therapeutics, as the colleague from the Commission mentioned. So here we are a little bit lagging behind, and that could also help us enormously. Thirdly, there is a need, however, to not to look at the things that went bad. I think we can always improve. Everyone has started to do lessons learned. What can we do better next time? It's never ideal, but I think we managed overall quite well. But we have to be prepared for the next time, because there will be a next time. Perhaps in 10 years or in 20 years, but there will be a next time. And it's good that we are being prepared for that. And finally, I would like to join my colleague John Ryan in thanking the healthcare professionals, the people in the hospitals who had to face extremely difficult situations, and I think who are coping very well under very challenging circumstances. Over.
Puno vam
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us at Press Club Europe, talking about the European vaccines strategy and focusing on the acceleration of vaccines. Thank you, Mr. Capak. Thank you to our participants who joined us online, and we hope that we will see you in the future in person. Mr. Capak, thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation. This is all. We have now come to the end of this Press Club Europe, and I hope to see you soon.